Hello everyone, welcome to this video. This is the first video on this channel and we'll be discussing who will win the next Canadian general election based off the changes in polling since the 2019 election. In the 2019 election, Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party won a minority government, which means they did not control the majority of seats in the House of Commons. They won 157 out of the 338 seats. You need 170 seats for a majority. The Conservatives Party was in second place at 121 seats, the NDP at 24, the Green Party at 3 seats, and the Bloc at 32 seats. So we'll be looking at who will win the next election. Since it is a minority government, at any point the other parties can decide to force an election. So it's actually quite likely that the next election will happen before 2023. So to formulate this projection, I only use the changes in polls since 2019, not any of my own ideas or opinions about how any of these ridings will vote. For this video, I'll be using the CBC poll tracker. Since I think this is a pretty good average of all of the publicly available polling data in Canada, which is compiled on this site. As you can see, current polling averages, Liberals are about 5 points ahead of the Conservative Party, 36 to 31% approximately. The NDP is in third place at 18.3%, the Bloc at 6.6%, and the Green Party at 6.2%, with other parties at less than 3% support. So rather than looking at the national polling averages only, I will be looking at the regional polling averages, which are also available. So this will provide a more accurate picture of how the different regions of the country are trending in terms of who they support, which political party they support. So for example, here you can see the Atlantic provinces. You can see the Liberals about 20 points ahead of the Conservative Party, which compared to, for example, Ontario, here we have the Liberals nearly 10 points ahead of the Conservative Party. So I'll be basing this video off the regional changes and trends since the last election rather than national changes, since this provides a more accurate picture of how the different regions of the country will vote. So this video will be strictly based off of the gains or losses in the polls for each party since the last election, and none of my own opinions about how the next election will go. So this chart here shows the changes on a national basis as well as on a regional basis since the last election. So as you can see, on a national basis, there has been some change, not a large amount of change for each party. We see the Liberals up about 2.5 points, the Conservatives down about 3 points, the NDP up about 2 points, and the other parties down by 1 and 0.3%. So looking at the regions of the country, Atlantic provinces, we see a bit of a stronger performance for the Liberal Party, up 4%, Conservatives down 4%, then NDP up about 4%, and the Greens down about 4% as well. So that is a little bit stronger for the Liberals, a little weaker for certainly the Green Party, which, since they do hold one seat there, is problematic for them. And then looking at Quebec, we see gains for all the parties, actually at the expense of the Bloc, which is down nearly 4 points in Quebec. So all the parties are sort of the beneficiary of that decline in support. And then in Ontario, as you can see, the largest province, not much of a change overall. Liberals down less than 1%, Conservatives down 1.4%, the NDP gaining at the expense of those two parties about 2.5%, and the Greens essentially unchanged since the last election. But then moving west, the remaining provinces are where we see a little bit more of a change. The Prairies, Alberta, so Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, we see a fairly significant decline in support for the Conservative Party. 9 points, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and 16 points in Alberta. And then you can see that both the NDP and the Liberal Party gains at the expense of the Conservative Party in these provinces. So that definitely is a more significant change. And of course, perhaps some might say, the Conservative Party overperformed their polls in Alberta in the last 2 elections, which is true, they certainly did, and 16 points decline seems pretty significant, but it is certainly possible. And of course, the Conservatives won 69% of the popular vote in Alberta in the last election, so even a 16-point decline still puts them above 50% in Alberta. So I wouldn't say 16 points decline is impossible, even if they have been overperforming the polls in the past. And a 16-point decline certainly means that even less than that, a 10-point decline would mean that certainly some ridings that the Conservatives hold in Alberta would be probably put in danger or move over into the Liberal or NDP parties. So then finally looking at BC, we see about a 7-point increase for the Liberal Party, a 6-point decrease. This was on a regional basis where the Conservatives made some of their biggest gains in terms of seat count in the last election, and we see some of that being given back at this time. So the one party that has gains in every region is the New Democrats, where they are gaining by varying amounts in all regions of the country, which is certainly a change from the last 2 elections where they've been facing fairly significant declines. So especially in provinces like Ontario where and British Columbia, where they have more of a significant presence there, those gains certainly solidify or could perhaps even expand some of their seat counts there. Looking at the Conservative Party, many of their more vulnerable seats are not located in Alberta and the prairie provinces where they see the biggest decline. So although these declines are significant, the national numbers certainly show that the Conservative Party could hold up on a national level better than they would perhaps in those provinces in terms of their seat count. And the increase in 2.6% support for the Liberal Party nationally certainly could put them close or over the top of a majority government. They already came close last time despite losing the popular vote. So with 157 out of 170 seats, they would only need to gain 13 seats to put them at majority government territory, and a 2% support increase compared to a 3.6% support decline for the Conservatives certainly can help them achieve that, since the Conservatives are in second place and 3.5% decline is not insignificant for them. So I'll be using 4 different characterizations for each riding based off of how likely it is to go for each party. So if the polling changes indicate riding is safe, that would mean it is greater than 15% margin over the second place party in that riding, and will be indicated by the solid color there. And then likely ridings are ridings that have a 7 to 15% margin over the second place party. Lean ridings have a 3 to 7% margin over the second place party, and tilt ridings have a 0 to 3% margin over the second place party. So tilt ridings, think of them as very close ridings. Lean ridings, approximately 5% within that range. Likely ridings, 10% is within that range. So that can be approximate benchmarks to think of as we go through the map, since those numbers are roughly within the center of those ranges. So this is the map I'll be using for this projection. I have linked it in the description so you can access it as well, both the blank and the complete map, so as well as the 2019 election result map. So we'll begin with ridings and provinces on the eastern side of the country and move through the country province by province. So we'll start with Newfoundland and Labrador, move through Nova Scotia all the way over to British Columbia, finishing up with the territories. So for each province, I will begin with the safe ridings for each party, beginning with the Liberal Party since they're currently the party in government and won the last election. Then I'll do the safe ridings in that province for the Conservative Party, the NDP, the Bloc, and the Green Party, followed by the likely ridings for each party, beginning of course with the Liberal Party, and then followed by the lean ridings as well as the tilt ridings, which are closer, and hopefully spend a little bit more time pointing out which ones they are as we work through the video. It will be a bit of a longer video as we fill in each riding individually and move through the country that way. So let's get started. We'll begin with the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, beginning with the safe seats for each party in this province. So we'll begin with the Liberal Party. We have a few safe seats out of Newfoundland and Labrador for the Liberal Party. This includes Avalon, moving over to Labrador, and the south of St. John's. So as you can see, 5 out of the 7 seats in Newfoundland and Labrador are safe for the Liberal Party. Of course, this province votes quite strongly for the Liberal Party in most elections and has for quite some time. So then the remaining 2 ridings are likely ridings. We have Bonavista, Brewer, and Trinity is likely for the Liberal Party, and then St. John's East is likely for the NDP, pickup for the NDP in the 2019 election, expected to keep that riding by a margin of 7 to 15 points in the next election based off of the current polls. So that completes all of the ridings in Newfoundland and Labrador, 6 going to the Liberals, 1 for the NDP. So next we'll move over to the province of Nova Scotia, once again beginning with safe ridings for the Liberal Party. So we have Central Nova, South Shore, St. Margaret's, Kings Hants, and then in the Halifax area, 3 out of the 4 ridings are safe for the Liberal Party. So that is all of the safe ridings in Nova Scotia. So we'll move over to likely ridings. So the riding of Halifax is likely for the Liberal Party, as well as the 2 ridings on Cape Breton are likely for the Liberal Party. Cumberland, Colchester, likely for the Liberal Party. So we got 4 likely ridings, and then the final riding goes to the Liberal Party as well by a lean margin. This is West Nova. Of course, this was a pickup for the Conservative Party by a narrow margin in the 2019 election, based off the current polls, going back to the Liberal Party by a 3 to 7% margin. So all 11 ridings in Nova Scotia, once again, projected to go to the Liberal Party. Not much of a change here over the last couple of elections. So we'll move over to Prince Edward Island. Again, similar to the other maritime provinces, quite a strong province for the Liberal Party. Actually, the Green Party is in second place in many of these ridings. So moving across the island, 3 seats safe for the Liberal Party, including Charlottetown, and then 1 likely seat, that's Egmont on the western side of the island. So not much to see over in Prince Edward Island, reliably Liberal part of the country. And then moving over to New Brunswick, 10 ridings in New Brunswick. Here we see a little bit more of a diversity in outcomes compared to the other maritime provinces. So we'll begin with safe seats for the Liberal Party. We have 4 of them. So we have Moncton there, and then on the northern part of the province, 2 safe seats there. So those are all the safe seats for the Liberal Party. And then we actually also have 2 safe seats for the Conservative Party in New Brunswick, and these are New Brunswick Southwest and Tobique-Mactaquac. So those are all the safe ridings in New Brunswick. We've got now 4 ridings left, beginning with likely for the Liberal Party. We have 2 of these seats being likely for the Liberal Party, Miramichi, Grand Lake, and St. John Rothsay. And for the Conservative Party, we have 1 likely riding, and this is Fundy Royal. So the remaining riding is Fredericton, and based off the current polls, this riding is expected to go to the Liberal Party by a tilt margin, so less than 3%. Of course, this riding is currently held by the Green Party, was a pickup from the last election. Actually quite surprising. It has been a close race numerous times in the past. Last time was a close three-way race between the Liberals, Conservatives, and Green Party. And based off the current polls, it's likely to be a close three-way race once again. Of course, this time the Green Party has the incumbency here, which could give them an advantage, but based off of the polling in the Atlantic provinces, currently going back to the Liberal Party by a narrow margin. So that concludes New Brunswick. We've got 7 of their 10 ridings going to the Liberal Party, 3 going to the Conservative Party. So in total for the 32 maritime provinces, we have 28 for the Liberal Party, 3 for the Conservative Party, and 1 for the NDP. Only 1 seat changing hands compared to the 2019 election. Of course, that would be the riding of West Nova, going back to the Liberal Party after the Conservative Party picked that seat up in the last election. So moving on to the next province, which is of course the province of Quebec. And before I begin going through the seats in Quebec, I'll first say that I do not speak French. Many of these riding names are difficult to pronounce for me being someone who does not speak French. So I will probably not try to pronounce most of these names. We'll just move through the areas of the province and discuss it as we go through, hopefully without too much of a difficulty in pronunciation. So beginning with the Liberal Party, safe seats for the Liberal Party are heavily concentrated in the Montreal area. Of course, this has traditionally been one of the strongest, if not the strongest, Liberal area of the country. Even in the 2011 election, when the Liberals did very poorly in many parts of the country, they still won a number of seats in the Montreal area, including, of course, the Prime Minister's own seat at that time. So beginning with Liberal seats, moving from east to west roughly in the province, we have 1 safe seat for the Liberal Party in the Quebec City area. Outside of Montreal, we have the riding of Pontiac and the 2 seats in the Gatineau area, safe for the Liberal Party. And then moving into the Montreal area, most of these seats are safe for the Liberal Party. So we'll just fill these in. Of course, the Prime Minister's own seat is in the Montreal area, as well as several of his cabinet ministers, including the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, Marc Garneau. So those are the majority of the seats. We have 1 more there, safe for the Liberal Party. So you can see that adds quite a large number to the total number of seats for the Liberal Party. It is quite a large block of seats, and many of these seats are won by very large margins, sometimes 50 points, more than 50 points. So very safe seats for the Liberal Party. And we have 1 more seat still in the Montreal area, safe for the Liberal Party, and that is that seat right there. So that concludes the safe seats for the Liberal Party. Now moving over to safe seats for the Conservative Party. There are a number of safe seats for the Conservative Party, mostly in the Quebec City, south of Quebec City region, where the Conservatives have been regionally quite strong there. This includes, of course, the riding of Beauce, which was formerly held by the leader of the People's Party. Of course, he lost in the last election, still expected to be a safe Conservative seat. We have 2 seats in the Quebec City area, safe for the Conservative Party, and then 1 more seat in sort of the South Quebec. I guess it is connected to the other Conservative safe seats, Richmond, Arthabaska, and then 1 more seat on the north of Quebec City, north and west. So that concludes the safe seats for the Conservative Party. We have a total of 7 safe seats for the Conservative Party. So moving on to the NDP. The NDP has 1 safe seat in Quebec, and that's the riding of Rosemont-le-Petit-Patrie in the Montreal area. Their only seat that they won in the 2019 election, all the remaining incumbents and seats which they won in the 2015 election. They lost in the 2019 election. They won 16 seats in the 2015 election, going all the way down to 1 in the 2019 election. So quite a heavy loss for the New Democrats in Quebec, but expected to retain this seat by a safe margin. The MP for this seat performed quite well actually in the last election when many of his colleagues did not in the province, so that riding is expected to remain safe for the NDP based off the current polling. And then moving over to the Bloc, the Green Party does not have seats in Quebec. There are a number of safe seats for the Bloc, as you might expect in Quebec. The large riding there on the eastern side, and then quite a few ridings in the south of Quebec. Actually, several of these ridings were formerly held by the NDP, and then here on the north side, these are traditionally strong seats for the Bloc. And we also have the leader of the Bloc's seat in that area, and then we have 2 more seats safe for the Bloc outside of the Montreal South Quebec region. So that gives a total of 13 safe seats for the Bloc in Quebec. Of course, that would already put them over the 12 seats required to have recognized party status in the House of Commons. So considering their performances in the 2011 and 2015 election, where they could not reach that threshold, to have 13 seats which are safe at this time is quite an achievement. Of course, they won 32 in the last election, so 13 safe seats at this point for the Bloc in Quebec. So we'll move on to likely ridings, beginning with the Liberal Party. And the Liberal Party does have only a few, actually, likely ridings. This would include the riding there of the new Minister of Innovation and Science and Industry, I think is what his cabinet portfolio was called. So likely for the Liberals there. And then in the south of Quebec, we have 2 seats likely for the Liberal Party. So that is the total of likely seats for the Liberal Party in Quebec. Moving over to the Conservative side, 2 seats likely for the Conservative Party in Quebec, and that is this riding. I'll not try to pronounce it, it's a very long name. So yes, one likely seat for the Conservative Party in Quebec. The NDP does not have any likely seats in Quebec, and then so we'll move right over to the Bloc, where we do have a number of likely seats. We have on the eastern side there 1 seat, Jonquière, likely, seat beside it there likely, and then moving down to South Quebec there on the north side of Montreal, and then we have 2 more seats on the south end of the province, likely for the Bloc. So that brings us to a total of 7 likely seats for the Bloc in Quebec, bringing their total to 20 seats in Quebec. So that is the end of all of the safe and likely seats in Quebec. So we'll move over to lean seats, beginning of course with the Liberal Party. They do have a number of leaning seats in Quebec. So we have the Minister of National Revenue's seat here in the Gaspé area, Quebec City. President of the Treasury Board, his seat is also leaning. And then moving over, lean seat there. And then Hochelaga, I believe is how you say it. Formerly a fairly strong NDP seat, now leaning for the Liberal Party. NDP still does have a chance there in the next election. And then 2 more seats on the south of Quebec. Okay, so that's everything for the likely lean seats for the Liberal Party. So moving on to Conservative seats, we have 1 leaning seat. This is the riding of Chicoutimi-La-Fjord. Of course, that was a pickup in by-election in, I believe, 2017. Between the 2015 and 2019 elections for the Conservative Party from the Liberal Party. They are expected to hold on to this seat by a lean margin based on the current polls. So that is the only leaning seat for the Conservative Party in Quebec. So we'll move on to Bloc seats. There are 2 Bloc seats that are leaning. The large riding here in the north is leaning for the Bloc. And then we also have this seat, Rimouski, I won't say the rest of it. It's quite a long name. Also used to be a fairly strong NDP seat, now leaning for the Bloc. So that's all the lean seats in Quebec, and the remaining seats are tilt. There's actually a fair number of tilting seats in Quebec. This kind of shows why Quebec will really determine sort of the next election, who controls the government, provided the polls are sort of in the same range there right now, because with this number of tilting seats, even a small movement in the polls either way can be the deciding factor in whether, for example, the Liberals receive a majority or minority government, which party becomes the party most influential as the third party if the Liberals would become a minority government, because if the Bloc would do a little bit more poorly, giving some ridings to the Liberal Party in Quebec, then suddenly you could perhaps have a Liberal majority government, or the NDP returning to third party status. But if the Bloc does a little bit better than their polls, perhaps winning a few tilting or lean Liberal seats, then suddenly more likely to have a Liberal minority government, with actually a similar situation to what we have right now, with the Bloc as third party with quite an influential position in the House of Commons, but not really being strong enough to expand beyond their success in the 2019 election. So we'll begin with some tilting ridings. There are 3 of them for the Liberal Party in Quebec. This would include the riding of Sherbrooke, formerly NDP riding, Shefford, and this riding, very close riding. Conservatives have a chance there as well. So there are 2 more tilting Liberal ridings on the northwest side of Montreal here. One riding tilting to the Liberals, very close race, currently held by the Bloc. And then we have 1 more riding in this area, also close race, Liberals versus Bloc. So that's all for the Liberal Party in Quebec. So we'll move over to the Conservative Party. They have 1 tilting seat in Quebec, in the Quebec City area. Very close race as well between them and the Bloc here in this riding. I believe this riding is currently held by the Bloc. Was a close election also in the last race. And then we'll move over to the NDP, which does actually have a tilting seat in Quebec, and this is the riding of Berthier-Maskinongé, I believe is how you say it. Was quite a reliable NDP seat in the last 2 election cycles at least, and could potentially return to the NDP in the next election, but will be a very close race as well, regardless of who wins it, unless there's a major shift in the polls. Of course, it's currently held by the Bloc now. And then we have seats that are tilting for the Bloc. The remaining seats are all tilting for the Bloc, and then 3 more in the south of Quebec tilting for the Bloc. So this group of ridings in the sort of surrounding the Montreal area, if you include Shefford, Sherbrooke, and we've got about 8 ridings, perhaps 10. These ridings are not especially large margins either way, so that group of ridings will be extremely important in determining who succeeds in the next election, where the balance of power is. Can the Liberals win all 8 of those? If the Bloc or NDP or even the Conservative Party can make some inroads into any of these seats, suddenly the chances of a Liberal majority government are reduced by a significant amount, just based off of this group of seats here in the south of Quebec. So really an important region. Depends on how the Bloc does, how the Liberals do, and whether the Conservatives and NDP can improve in Quebec, since the last election, certainly for the NDP, and the last several elections for the Conservatives have not been particularly strong in Quebec. Really important region for who has control of Parliament after the next election. So that concludes Quebec, all 78 ridings. So a majority of those seats did go to the Liberal Party. 39 out of the 78 seats going to the Liberal Party, which actually is exactly half of the seats going to the Liberal Party in Quebec, and the remaining seats going to the Conservatives, NDP, and Bloc. Obviously, it is a reduction in seats for the Bloc compared to the last election, and an increase for the Liberal Party. Conservatives also picking up 1 Bloc seat there, and the NDP as well. So 6 seats down for the Bloc. compared to the last election. Still doing quite well, though, comfortably within official party status. So that concludes Quebec. We'll now move over to Ontario. Obviously, hugely consequential province, 121 ridings in this province, more than a third of the total ridings. So we will begin with safe Liberal ridings, of which there are many in this province. We'll begin in the Ottawa area. Numerous safe ridings in this region, as can be expected. So 5 out of 6 of the ridings in that area safe for the Liberal Party. And then we've got this riding, Kingston and the Islands, small riding there, safe for the Liberal Party as well. And then from there we'll move right down into the Toronto metro area. So we have quite a number of seats in this region safe for the Liberal Party. This also, of course, includes much of Brampton, actually all of Brampton, safe for the Liberal Party. Conservatives did make efforts in this region in the last election, but have been, despite that, steadily losing support. Most of these ridings are comfortably within the safe margin for the Liberal Party. So continuing to move through the Toronto area, around the center of the city, several of these seats are not safe, not because the Conservatives are in second place, but because of the NDP can come within striking distance or even perhaps a chance for winning some of these seats in the center of Toronto. So continuing to move through the city, we have a number of safe seats. Here, moving towards the eastern side, Markham area, and then these more northern, larger ridings are not safe for the Liberal Party. So that is all of the safe seats for the Liberal Party in the Toronto metro area. There are quite a few. This is, in the last 2 elections, really been an area where the Liberals have done well and have been able to solidify their support, and doesn't appear to be changing based off of the current polls in Ontario. No sign of this support weakening or any danger to most of these seats. In fact, much of the remaining seats are likely seats for the Liberal Party, which provincially and in the provincial election and in the 2011 were seats that the Conservatives were able to hold. So I'll move now over into the Hamilton area. We have 3 safe seats for the Liberal Party there. Of course, the large riding here in the north is Milton, which was Lisa Rait's riding from the Conservative Party, which she did lose in the last election by quite a large margin, despite holding it for many years. Sort of a sign of how this area is changing and the electoral reality that the Conservatives have been facing in this area, where they haven't been able to hold on to very many of their seats over the last few years here. So we've got a few more safe seats. These would include Waterloo and London North Centre and London West, as well as Minister of Health's riding Thunder Bay Superior North. So that's all for safe seats for the Liberal Party in Ontario. As you can see, quite a few seats there. 54 if my math is correct. So we'll move on to Conservative safe seats. The Conservatives do have a number of safe seats in Ontario. So we'll begin on the east side of the province, moving through up to Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke. And then in this region we have 2 more safe seats, and then Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, and then a few more safe seats in the south of the province here. So we got 1 more seat right there. Those are all of the safe Conservative seats in sort of the broader Southern Ontario region. We've got a few more within the cities area. We have Wellington, Halton Hills there, and we have Thornhill here in the Toronto metro. Of course, that is Peter Kent's seat, has been reliably Conservative for quite a while there, and he's been able to hold on to his seat with a fairly large margin in the last couple of elections, despite many of his colleagues losing their seats in the areas around him. So that's everything for the safe Conservative seats in Ontario. So we'll move on to safe NDP seats. So we have 4 safe NDP seats in Ontario. This is Hamilton Centre, London Fanshawe, Timmins James Bay, and Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing. So those are the 4 safe NDP seats in Ontario. Green Party does not have any seats in Ontario, so we'll move on to likely seats for the Liberal Party. and there are quite a few. In Ontario, we've got Glengarry, Prescott, Russell. We have Canada, Carleton right there, likely for the Liberal Party. And then in the Ottawa, the remaining seat here, Nepean, likely for the Liberal Party. And then we'll move right into the Toronto metro area, where we have Whitby, likely for the Liberal Party, as well as Markham Stouffville, and then many of the remaining seats in the Toronto metro area are likely for the Liberal Party. So then in the remaining areas of Ontario, we have a couple of seats in the Hamilton region likely for the Liberal Party, as well as St. Catharines in the Niagara region, and 4 ridings in the Kitchener-Guelph region, including the riding of Guelph itself. And then we have in the north of Ontario a couple more seats. The Speaker's own seat, Nipissing, Timiskaming, as well as Sudbury, three seats in the northern sort of region of Ontario, bringing the Liberals' total to 134. So we'll move on to Conservative likely seats in Ontario. There are quite a few. Many of these seats are within that 11 to 15% range in southern Ontario here. So we'll start with the riding of Carleton, likely for the Liberal or the Conservative Party, and then moving over Parry Sound, Muskoka, down into southern Ontario here. Many of these ridings likely for the Conservative Party, and this also includes the leader of the opposition's riding of Durham. Pretty likely that he would win it if there was an election now, but not as safe, of course, as the Prime Minister's own riding in Montreal. And then finally, looking at the Toronto Metro, we have one likely seat here, and that's Markham Unionville, likely for the Conservative Party in the Toronto Metro. So now moving over to the NDP, we have one likely seat in Ontario. That's the riding of Hamilton Mountain, likely for the NDP. And then looking at lean Liberal seats next, we've got a few. Bay of Quinte here, leaning Liberal. Peterborough, Kawartha, Newmarket, Aurora, that's within the Toronto Metro, leaning Liberal, as well as Niagara Centre and Nickel Belt. So those are all of the leaning Liberal seats in Ontario. I believe that's 5 seats. So we'll move on to leaning Conservative seats. We have 3 leaning Conservative seats. These are Hastings, Lennox, and Addington. Barrie, Springwater, or Medonte, and then Oshawa, leaning to the Conservative Party. The NDP is actually in second place in that riding. So that's it for the Conservative Party leaning seats. We'll move on to Liberal or NDP leaning seats. We have 1 leaning seat, and that's the riding of Windsor West, leaning to the NDP in Ontario. So finally, we'll do tilting seats. These are the closest seats, less than 3-point margin, and there are a few of them in Ontario. Could go either way between whichever parties are competing there. So we'll begin with the Liberal Party, where we have 4 tilting seats for the Liberal Party in Ontario. So this is Richmond Hill, King Vaughan, Kitchener-Conestoga. That was one of the closest ridings in the 2019 election between the Liberals and Conservatives. And then finally, we have Thunder Bay, Rainy River as a tilting Liberal seat. So 4 tilt Liberal seats in the province of Ontario. It looks just now like I missed a Liberal lean seat. That is here, Hamilton East, Stony Creek is leaning Liberal. So now that we've got that fixed, we'll move on over to tilting Conservative seats, of which there are 6 tilting Conservative seats. So we have here Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill. We have Flamborough, Glanbrook. We have Niagara Falls. We have Kenora in the north, and we have Essex, as well as Northumberland, Peterborough South. So those are the 6 ridings tilting to the Conservatives in Ontario, very close ridings. So then finally we have 2 seats tilting to the NDP in Ontario, and these are Davenport in the Toronto Metro, and then Windsor-Tecumseh in the Essex region. Both ridings actually are currently held by the Liberal Party, so those are both pickups for the NDP in Ontario, as they have gained a bit in the polls there since the last election. So net gain of 2 for the NDP in Ontario, and net loss of 2 for the Liberals in Ontario. Actually, the Conservatives, if they won all of their tilt ridings and didn't pick up any other tilting or any other ridings at all, would actually win the same number of seats in the exact same configuration as they won in the 2019 election, sort of showing how little the polls have actually changed in Ontario since the last election. So that concludes all of the ridings for Ontario. We see currently now 144 seats for the Liberals, 50 seats for the Conservatives, and 11 seats for the NDP, as well as 26 for the Bloc. I guess people who may critique how Canada votes, this sort of illustrates their point. I guess if they say that we have an east-west divide in this country in terms of how we vote, 144 seats for the Liberals, that's approaching a majority government actually. They only need 26 more seats to gain majority government status, just with what you might say are the eastern provinces, whereas the Conservatives have 50 seats, which is, less than half of the total seats that they normally would win. So I guess it's interesting to look at how things are at this point as we move from east to west in this country. So we'll move on to the province of Manitoba. 14 seats in total in this province, and we'll begin with safe Liberal seats, of which there are a few. So we have here in the Winnipeg region a few safe Liberal seats. We have Winnipeg South, Winnipeg South Centre, Winnipeg North, and St. Boniface, St. Vital. So those are all the safe Liberal seats in Manitoba. So we'll move on to Conservative Party. Rural Southern Manitoba, very strongly conservative in how they vote. So those are the 4 safe conservative seats in Manitoba. Actually 5 safe conservative seats there in Manitoba. So we'll move on then to the NDP, where they do actually have 2 safe seats in Manitoba. We have the large riding of Churchill in the north there, and then Elmwood, Transcona, the Winnipeg region. So those are all the safe seats in Manitoba. We'll now move on to likely Liberal seats. So we have 1 likely Liberal seat. It's actually a pickup from the Conservatives, Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley, likely for the Liberal Party. And then likely for the Conservative Party, I don't believe that the Conservatives have any likely seats, nor do the NDP have any likely seats. So now we'll move straight over to leaning Liberal seats. We have no leaning Liberal seats in Manitoba, nor do we have Conservative, but we do have 1 NDP leaning seat, and that's the riding of Winnipeg Centre. Of course, that was a pickup for the NDP in the last election. Expected to hold on to it by 3 to 7 points given the current polls. So then we'll move on to tilting seats, and then we have for the Conservative Party currently, actually this based off of pure numbers, adding and subtracting poll changes, this riding here, Kildonan and St. Paul, is perfectly tied, but I will give it to the incumbent in this case, which is the Conservative Party, so tilting Conservative Party, but based off of the numbers I have added to the last election results, Kildonan and St. Paul there in Winnipeg has a 0.0% lead for either party. So incredibly close in that seat. Going to give it to the Conservative Party this time since they are the incumbent there, but could very easily go either way, and a small just shift in the polls will push it either way. So that is all of the ridings for Manitoba, all 14 ridings. We see the Liberals pick up 1 riding there on the west side of the Winnipeg area. So now move over to Saskatchewan, where we also have 14 ridings, and in the last election, of course, the Conservatives won all of the ridings. So that, I guess, predictably, there are no safe Liberal seats. So we'll begin with safe Conservative seats in Saskatchewan. These are all of the southern rural areas are safe for the Conservative Party, so we'll fill those in by very large margins in most cases. And then continuing to Regina, sort of metro area, there's no safe Conservative seats. And then looking at Saskatoon, we have Saskatoon Grasswood as safe for the Conservative Party. So we'll next move over to likely seats, likely for the Conservative Party. We have Regina Leuven, and Saskatoon University is also likely for the Conservative Party in Saskatchewan. So next we'll move over to lean seats. The Conservatives don't have any lean seats here, but actually the NDP, currently Saskatoon West here, was very close in the last election win for the Conservative Party, and given how the polls have changed in the Prairie provinces, this seat moves back to leaning NDP, so 3 to 7 points, but of course Conservative incumbent now. It's likely to be very close either way, so Saskatoon West leans NDP. Tilting ridings, currently both Regina Wascana and the large riding here, Desnathay Mississippi Churchill River, both leaning for the Liberal Party. Extremely narrow margins, could very well see it go either way. Of course, Regina would largely depend whether Ralph Goodale would run again. Now both seats have incumbent Conservative MPs, so very, very close ridings probably in the next election based off of current polls, going very narrowly to the Liberal Party, both ridings. So that concludes Saskatchewan. We don't see the Conservatives winning all of the ridings at this point anymore, but 3 ridings are likely to be very close and could go either way. So next we'll move over to Alberta. 33 out of 34 of their ridings went to the Conservative Party in the last election. So as you might expect, there aren't a lot of safe Liberal seats, but currently based off the polls, as you saw in the chart, 16-point drop for the Conservative parties in the polls since their last election results. So that does put the closest riding in the province over to the Liberal Party, which is the riding of Edmonton Centre, going to the Liberal Party by a safe margin. Now, of course, this is based off the polls. They have a Conservative incumbent now. The likelihood of it being a safe margin on election day, it's possible, certainly possible, but I don't know if it would be extremely likely based off of now having a Conservative Party incumbent MP. But based off the polling, expected to go to the Liberal Party by a safe margin. So now we'll move over to safe Conservative ridings. All of the rural areas of the province are safe for the Conservatives, so I'll just fill those in quickly. Not much to discuss there. Go to the Conservative Party by quite large margins in many cases. Not every riding, of course. You have ridings like around Edmonton, Lethbridge, not quite as significant margins for the Conservative Party, but still certainly within the safe range. So then we'll move over to Calgary. We do have a number of safe Conservative ridings here as well, sort of the outside of the city, with the exception of the northeast and the center, safe for the Conservative Party. Then looking at Edmonton, we have Edmonton West, and then St. Albert Edmonton here. Those are the only 2 safe Conservative ridings within the Edmonton area. So moving over to likely Liberal ridings, we do have a likely Liberal riding, and that is the riding of Edmonton Millwoods, going to the Liberal Party by a likely margin. So next we'll move over to likely Conservative ridings in Alberta. These are Calgary Forest Lawn, Calgary Confederation, and then Edmonton Riverbend and Edmonton Manning, going to the Conservative Party by a likely margin. And when I did safe ridings, I forgot about the single NDP safe seat, the only seat that did not vote for the Conservative Party in the last election. Of course, Edmonton and Strathcona, safe for the NDP in Alberta. So then we'll move on to leaning seats, leaning for the Liberal Party. I don't believe the Liberal Party has any leaning seats in Alberta, so we'll move right over to Conservative Party. Then we have Calgary Centre leaning for the Conservative Party, and Edmonton Greaseback, that riding also going by a lean margin to the Conservative Party. And then the final riding, going Calgary Skyview, going to the Liberal Party by a tilt margin, so very expected to be very close there. So we'll see who ends up winning that riding. So we see Liberals picking up 3 seats in Alberta at this time. Based off of this, I'd say certainly the 2 ridings in Edmonton are pretty likely, based off the current polls, to flip over to the Liberal Party, regardless of what margin they might be. Certainly quite likely that those ridings could move over to the Liberal Party. So that concludes Alberta. So now we move over to the final Canadian province of British Columbia, where we have 42 ridings, and certainly I would say probably the most diverse in terms of how they vote and the margins. Certainly I'm keeping a close eye on the polls. Really all 4 parties are in contention in British Columbia, have been in the last couple of elections as well, and certainly a province which I am interested in because of the margins. Many places have the potential for 3-way races, which are always more exciting, or even 4-way in some cases. So we'll begin with ridings which are safe for the Liberal Party, and these are mostly in the Vancouver area. Large riding there on the north, and then Vancouver itself. Many of these ridings have been safe Liberal seats for quite some time. And then we have Delta, Surrey moving over. Those are the 9, 10 ridings which are safe for the Conservative, or the Liberal Party, in British Columbia. So now we'll move over to safe Conservative seats, of which we have 4. So we have Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, Caribou, Prince George, and then Chilliwack, Hope, and Abbotsford, safe for the Conservative Party. Now, NDP, traditionally, British Columbia has been their best province, and that remains. We have Vancouver Kingsway, Vancouver East, New Westminster, Burnaby. The large riding here, Skeena, Bulkley Valley, and Courtenay, Alberni, all safe for the NDP. So, and then finally we have one seat safe for the Green Party. That, of course, is Saanich Gulf Islands, the Elizabeth May seat, former leader of the Green Party, expected to continue to be a safe Green seat there. So now we'll continue with likely Liberal seats. We have 4 likely seats. So this is South Surrey, White Rock, Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, Cloverdale, Langley City, and Burnaby North, Seymour. So those are the 4 likely Liberal seats in Vancouver. Actually, certainly South Surrey, White Rock is currently held by the Conservatives, and perhaps Cloverdale, Langley City as well. I'm not 100% sure on that, but these ridings sort of showing the Liberals gaining a little bit in British Columbia. So then we'll move over to likely Conservative seats. We have 4 likely Conservative seats. So those are the ridings of North Okanagan, Shuswap, Central Okanagan, Smilkameen, Nicola, Langley, Aldergrove, and Richmond Centre, all likely for the Conservative Party in British Columbia. So then we'll move over to likely NDP ridings. We have North Island, Powell River, Couch, and Malahat, Langford, and then South Okanagan, West Kootenay, as well as Burnaby South, which of course is the leader of the NDP's riding, and Esquimalt, Saanich, Sooke here in the Victoria area. So those are the likely NDP ridings. So now we'll move over to leaning Liberal ridings. We have here 3 leaning Liberal ridings. So we have Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge, leaning for the Liberal Party. We have Steveston, Richmond East, leaning for the Liberal Party. And we have Port Moody, Coquitlam, leaning for the Liberal Party. So these seats all currently held by the Conservative Party. Liberal pickups here. So certainly Conservative incumbents could potentially make these ridings quite close in the next election, but currently, based off the polls, Liberal pickups here as they've been gaining in the polls in British Columbia. So now we'll move over to leaning Conservative ridings in British Columbia, and we have one, which is Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou here. So then leaning NDP ridings, we don't have any leaning NDP ridings in British Columbia. So then we'll move right over into tilting Liberal ridings. So these are the real close ridings. We have one tilting Liberal riding, which is Kelowna Lake Country. This riding kind of moves back and forth between Liberal, Conservative in terms of how the polls change, very close either way. So definitely going to be a close race, currently held by the Conservative Party. So now we'll move over to tilt Conservative ridings. We do have a few of them. So we have Mission, Matsqui, Fraser Canyon, tilting Conservative, as well as Kootenay, Columbia. And then there's one more riding here that I missed, or two actually, two ridings that I missed. We have Victoria, should be lean for the NDP, and then Nanaimo Ladysmith is a likely green riding at this point. So that concludes British Columbia. As you can see, not a ton of safe seats compared to a province like, Alberta or another province. Definitely some opportunities for all of the parties to make gains here. So at this point, we see the Liberal Party making gains here. The NDP actually doesn't have a lot of leaning or tilting seats, so it makes it a little bit harder for their numbers actually to decrease here, because they do have higher margins of wins here in the last election in their seats, and they do tend to perform a little bit better in British Columbia than in some other provinces. So that leaves now finally 3 more ridings, which are of course the territories, 1 riding each. So we'll take a look at those now. Of course, there's no real polling for the Northern Territories, so I just apply the national change in the national polls to these ridings, but those are of course smaller changes than perhaps are actually occurring or likely to be occurring in this area of Canada. So I wouldn't say that these ridings are in any way, confident predictions of what's going to happen here, especially because in the past these ridings have moved around a lot in terms of how they voted. You have Nunavut, for example, 2011 voting for the Conservative Party, 2015 voting for the Liberal Party, and now 2019 voting for the NDP. So, these ridings are really up in the air as to who's leading here. So, but based off of the polling at least, and who won the last election, we can characterize Nunavut as a likely riding for the NDP. Northwest Territories as a safe Liberal riding. The last 2 elections have been pretty positive for the Liberals in Northwest Territories, so I'm a little more confident about that riding, certainly, than Nunavut or Yukon. So I'd say maybe not by a safe margin, but pretty likely that Northwest Territories goes to the Liberal Party. And then we have the Yukon, which is currently going to the Liberals by a lean margin. That one was actually, to me, very much surprisingly close. In the last election, the Conservatives came within, I believe, less than 100 votes of winning that riding. So, of course, since then we have seen a little bit of a increase in support for the Liberal Party, a decrease for the Conservative Party, so that does push this riding into the leaning column, but certainly possible that the Conservatives could potentially win this riding, or maybe the Liberals win it by a larger margin again. These ridings tend to fluctuate a lot in terms of party support. So looking at this map, we've got all 338 ridings filled in. So we have 174 ridings for the Liberal Party, which does put them over the majority government status, which is 170 ridings. Barely, though, only 4 ridings over, so perhaps you see a few NDP members resign or leave the caucus, or whatever the case is, and then you do see that they are technically below the majority government status. But if this would be the outcome, certainly they would have no problem continuing to govern, even if there were at any point a change in their caucus membership. And then second place, we have the Conservatives at 108 seats. Still in second place, not a huge change for compared to many other elections. With each party gaining or losing less than 20 seats, it's not a major change. So Conservatives remaining in second place, 108 seats. NDP in this case regained third party status, 28 seats, still less than 2011 or 2015, but a little bit higher than they did in 2019. The Bloc, fourth place, 26 seats, a bit of a decrease from the last election, but still definitely well above the 12-seat threshold needed for official party status. And then finally, we have the Green Party at 2 seats, decrease of 1, of course, Fredericton going to the Liberal Party, but very much still in play for the Green Party in that province. So we have 2 seats for the Green Party finally. And I do just want to note, of course, in the last election, we had Vancouver Granville, the riding of Jody Wilson-Raybould, going independent. At this point, of course, we have no idea if she would be running again, the chances of her succeeding. So at this point, that riding, characterized as a safe Liberal seat in Vancouver, as it has traditionally been in Vancouver. So we won't be counting that as an independent seat for now. We're counting it as a Liberal seat, so that also has an impact on the totals here. So once again, Liberal Party in majority government status with a bare minimum of a majority needed, but enough certainly for them to function as a majority government. So we'll take a look here at this chart. This shows the change in seat count for each party compared to the 2019 election. So take a look at the national level first. 17 seats gained for the Liberal Party, 13 seats of a net loss for the Conservative Party, 4 seats of gain for the NDP, the Bloc, 6 seats lost, Green Party, 1 seat lost. And you'll note that if you add it all together, it does end up to be +1, not 0. And that, of course, is due to the independency in Vancouver being added into the Liberal column as well. So that is the reason for that. So looking at the Atlantic region, we have 2 seats gained for the Liberals, 1 each lost for the Conservative and Green Party. The NDP does not have a seat change. In the Atlantic provinces, they only have 1 seat there, expected to retain it, not gain any others. So then moving down to Quebec, 6 seats lost for the Bloc, so that is shared by the Liberals, Conservative, and NDP. Obviously, Liberals are the beneficiaries there, primary beneficiaries. So in Ontario is the only place where we see the Liberals lose seats, losing 2 seats to the NDP, and actually the Conservatives and Greens remaining unchanged, which is actually kind of shocking compared to comparing the size of Ontario and the number of seats they have, that only 2 seats are changing hands when you compare it to a much smaller province like Alberta, British Columbia, where you have significantly more, action in terms of seats changing hands compared to the number of seats in Ontario. So that, I guess, is a reflection of how little the polls have changed in Ontario since the last election. Liberals still remain firmly ahead of the Conservatives there, and the NDP has gained a little bit. So I think that's why we see the 2-seat gain there for the NDP. And then looking at the prairie provinces, that includes Manitoba and Saskatchewan, we see 3 seats gained for the Liberal Party, 4 seats lost for the Conservative Party, and 1 seat gained for the NDP. So actually 3 of those seats are in Saskatchewan, which is a little bit surprising. But of course, it's maybe hard for the Conservatives to replicate winning all 14 seats there again. So we see that there is some change there in those 2 provinces. Then in Alberta, we see the Liberals gain 3 seats at the expense of the Conservatives, 2 in Edmonton, 1 in Calgary. In BC, we see the Liberals gain 7 seats, the Conservatives lose 6 seats. Of course, this difference is because the Liberals also have the 1 independent seat added to their gain. So in total, we see 17 seats for the Liberals gained, 13 for the Conservatives lost, 4 gained for the NDP, 6 lost for the Bloc, and 1 lost for the Green Party. So this wraps up this look at how the next Canadian election will go based off of the current polling data. Again, as I said before, this is not necessarily how I feel the election would go if it were held today, but it's 100% based off of the polling data available on the CBC poll tracker, which they've averaged out, which I feel represents a fairly accurate picture of the current polling situation in Canada. So this is not my own opinion, this is strictly based off of the numbers. So thank you for watching this video. Please leave any suggestions for future topics to cover in the comments. I'd be happy to take a look at anything that's Canadian election content related, and I will see you in the next video.